I think, are we okay? I think we're good. Thank you. We had a little bit of feedback there for a second. All right, everyone. Good evening and welcome to the City of Lake Forest Park City Council Committee Special Committee of the Whole meeting, Monday, August 14th. A little bit of feedback there, Matt. I don't know if we can turn that back down a bit. And I'd like to call this meeting to order. And at this time, do we have any citizen comments? Is there anyone online, Matt?
I don't currently have anybody online.
Thank you very much. And I don't see anybody in the council chambers, so we will move on to, we actually have a very full agenda tonight, folks. So 4 items, the reasonable use exemption item. Councilmember Bodie will be very excited about that, as we all are, to get that moving forward. And I know that our attorney and administration are looking for some answers from us as a policymaking body. We also have continued discussion on the capital improvement plan, pavement resurfacing plan. Director Perigo is bringing that back to us. And 2 of our colleagues have a great presentation on multimodal healthy streets pilot proposal. And then a couple touches on some next steps regarding speed limit reductions. With that, let's kick it off with, I'm assuming it's going to be Attorney Pratt relative to the RUE discussion, please.
Then you got very involved in retaining walls and the right-of-way tree ordinance. So we're coming back to this, and at the last meeting, you'd asked us to add an intent section to intent and purpose, which is in the draft that you have. And then you'll see we added language at the bottom of that section about square footage of a home. And we included the 750 square feet that was discussed at the last time. And you had asked us to see what we could find from the city of Bellevue, because this is their ordinance use of 750 square feet, to see what they had used as backup information for that number. I initially started trying to find it in their council packets during the period of time that they adopted this ordinance, and I could not find it. But luckily, I currently work with, in his different capacity, someone who was the planning manager at the time this was adopted. So I just asked him, and he was very helpful. And he explained sort of the process they went through to get this ordinance. And he explained there is no backup information. This was a project of a council member, and this is what the council member thought was a reasonable number, and so that was the information that their council used. So unfortunately, I don't have any information from Bellevue that you could then use, specific reports or anything like that. But Phil reminded me today that one of the bills recently passed does say in it that cities cannot require ADUs of less than 1,000 square feet. And there was some discussion at one of your meetings, I think Councilmember Bodie, it was you, about using that number as well. So that would certainly be backup for that number. That, the legislature is seeing that a small dwelling, an ADU, can be 1,000 square feet. If you put that in instead of 1,000 square feet, instead of 750 square feet, we could use that as support for the number. So I guess if I could interrupt for 1 second, what we're looking for is, we have not done SEPA checklist or threshold determination on this ordinance yet, and has not been sent to Commerce, because we were waiting to get, knowing we were going in the right direction for council, and we would have enough done that we could do those 2 things and not have to redo them. So I think that's what I'm looking for tonight, that we're going in the right direction with the draft you have now, and we can do SEPA and send it to Commerce, or no, we want some pretty big changes in this and a different direction, and then we'll do that for you and then come back and see if we can do SEPA and Commerce.
Councilmember Bodie.
Yes, thank you so much. And I have reviewed the draft, though I don't have my computer here. So therefore, I don't have my draft in front of me. Sorry, I was running late and I didn't grab my computer, but I did review it. So I think you've done an excellent job with the additions. I really feel good about the intent language and so forth. On the 750 square feet, I think Bellevue had 750, Kirkland had 850. And, you know, we were talking also about the fact that a two-story 750 would be 1,500 square feet. You know, most of the reasonable use exemption properties that have been built, my understanding from planning director Bennett, have been two-story. In other words, they're trying to make maximum use of the footprint. So I listened to the 1,000 square feet in connection with, well, you know, if it were one story, I would say 1,000 square feet, but if it's two-story, I wouldn't. And I could go with the 850. I think 750, which Bellevue has, is fairly low. So I would prefer not to go to the full 1,000, because then with two stories, that's a 2,000 square foot house. That's not like an exception kind of house, it seems to me. So those are my thoughts. I don't know what other council members think about the one-story, two-story, and also City Attorney Pratt and City Administrator Hill. Like, is there a way that we might want to express that in some way? I just think that people are building to the max when they can on these properties, so they're always building a second story, was my impression. So. Me.
Thank you, Administrator Hill, please.
Thanks. I just wanted to point out that the language, so it's House Bill 1337, and the language is that city or county may not establish a maximum gross floor area of 1,000 feet. And so that would, if you set the maximum gross floor area at 1,000 feet, that would be, if they want to do stories, two stories, 500 and 500. And so I don't know if that clarification in here would work for you.
That seems almost too stingy to me, because 500. But I think using the gross square footage of 1,000 square feet as part of our rationale makes sense, because then if we had 1,500, 750 and 750, then we're certainly above the that gross square footage. So not sure quite how to capture this in the best way for legal defensibility, but those are my thoughts.
Councilmember Goldman.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate all the detail that's here. I have a grammar question. So in that paragraph, it says dwellings with a footprint greater than 750 may not comply with the intent. What does the word may mean? Is that saying that it might, or it might not, it depends on the hearing examiner? Or is it saying it is not allowed to comply?
That it's a case-by-case determination. It depends a lot on the critical areas on the site, and that 750 may be reasonable for one site and not for another.
Okay.
If I just may clarify, I think we meant it as a rule of thumb based on our last discussion, kind of a guideline. Doesn't mean that it would be binding.
Councilmember Lebo.
Thank you. Thank you for the research on this. I'm comfortable with that 750 square foot as a footprint. The first house we owned was 1,500 square feet, two-story, three-bedroom. They're small, but it certainly is a quite livable space. So for determination of this, I would be quite comfortable with the 750. I could show you my 1,500 square foot house.
Thank you, Councilmember. Vice Chair Cassover or Councilmember Furtani, thoughts?
Yeah, I was actually trying to just look up the Kirkland code, but I'll do that in a minute. Given the information from city administrator, that state requirement is 1,000 square feet gross square footage. I too am comfortable with the 750 because a two-story at 750 easily is well over that. And so I can't see that. But I would have to defer to the legal minds here. I mean, I can't see that anybody would have a case against us on it there, so.
By studying to HB 1337.
Councilmember Furtani.
Hi, thank you, Deputy Mayor. As I recall, one of the precipitating events, not the, but one of the, was that property on Lion Creek at 205th. And I'm wondering if anybody can comment on whether this exception, that particular house that was proposed for that exception would be, or for that property would be applicable here.
Do you mean, would they have to use the new regulations?
Right.
My understanding is they already have a complete application, but I'm not sure. I don't know.
Sorry, not positive.
Okay.
It's a good question, Councilmember. Thank you for that. I honestly, having visited that site so many times, it's extraordinary to me that somebody would try to build there, but that's just as a layperson. Other thoughts on this threshold? I too will weigh in. I agree with my colleagues that based upon HB 1337, I'm comfortable with a 750 level with, you know, potentially 2 stories. I think if we go any higher than that, I think we're setting ourselves up for unintended consequences. And I, again, like my colleagues, I would defer to our legal counsel whether how defensible that is. However, I do believe that if it makes 3 of us that are sort of in a cluster there between 850, 750, 750, I think that there's going to be a place where that there's comfort in numbers. So we're not blazing a new trail here, and I think this would work fine for us. Does anyone else have, Mr. Hill?
Just since Councilmember Cassover was looking, Kirkland's maximum size is 1,200 square feet for an accessory dwelling unit. I have some floor area ratio exemptions for DADUs. Number of ADUs is 2.
If I
I'm not seeing
may, I
anything else.
believe that the footprint maximum for Kirkland is 850. The footprint. Yes, for reasonable use. So Bellevue's 750, Kirkland, I believe, is 850.
Councilmember French, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
When you said there'd be 3 of us and that would be more, do you mean there would be Kirkland, Lake Forest Park and Bellevue? And so that would be one of the justifications for 750?
I'll leave that to you, but I'm feeling rather than blazing a new trail.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm not sure that is a justification. We did what they did.
Okay.
That's why we looked to see what how
Fair enough.
Bellevue had backed it up, but I
Yeah.
think using the recently passed legislation would be helpful.
Would be the prudent path. Thank you for the clarification. Mr. Passover.
Yes, thank you. I am in the Kirkland REU code, and the following land uses may be proposed with a reasonable use exception: residential zones, 1 single family dwelling with a footprint no larger than 750 square feet and a maximum gross floor area of 1,500 square feet, including cantilevered areas, and attached garage not to exceed a footprint and gross floor area of 250 square feet. If no garage is provided, the square footage of garage uses cannot be allocated to the square footage allowances of the primary residence. So they're giving you 1,500 square feet for the living area and an additional 250 for the, so that may be where you got the, for 50 for the garage. So if you want that page and everything, I can send it to you, City Attorney Pratt. The citation? Yes, that's what I'm looking for here. It is
Way up there.
5. It's 90.180, and then it's paragraph 5 subsection. Oh, it's the first one, A.
So, Councilmember Gordon, you had talked about using the gross floor. Are you guys interested in 750 max on the footprint and 1,500 gross? Well,
Councilmember Bodie.
Yes, I would say that sounds good to me. I actually even like the garage language. So I think the full expression of it sounds good to me, and it's clearer. Because of the possible confusion you could have about a garage, right? So it's and it has the second story aspect. So I think that's excellent language.
Councilmember Lebo.
I too would be comfortable with that adoption of the Kirkland language.
Bertani.
Yes, I'd be comfortable with that language as well.
And I'll weigh in as well. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that's great. A great approach.
Sometimes I think I should have gone to law school.
Yeah, yeah. You didn't? Well, colleagues, any other thoughts on the RUE question and the language in here? It was really Ms. Pratt and Administrator Hill had asked us to come back to this to make sure that we had understanding so that they could go forward commerce, et cetera, and without having to reinvent the wheel. So are there any other topics here so that we make sure we're expeditious about the next steps? Vice Chair Castle.
Yeah, I don't have another topic. I just want to say that I also read this ahead of time, and I really appreciate a lot of the language in here. And thank you very much for doing that. I think it's very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just think you covered all the,
Yeah.
The environmental ecosystem stuff really super well. I just really appreciate that. And so I think it's good.
This is kind of like an auction going once. No, I'm not going to go there.
Same here.
Yeah,
I completely agree.
No, I think this is excellent language, and I really appreciate everybody's hard work on this. Thank you, Kim and Phil. Okay, let's move on to continued discussion of the capital improvement plan, pavement resurfacing plan, and that's Director Perigo. Welcome, Jeff.
All right, well, this is the third time we're bringing this back to council. There were some questions or some comments that council suggested they want to have some to chime in on some of the machinations of how we go through identifying streets that are going to be picked up for resurfacing in the future. So just a short presentation here. Some of it's going to be repeated from last time, but I do have updated numbers for the budget concerns going forward. So the program's overall goal is to provide safe traveling throughout the city by maintaining the existing infrastructure in a fiscally responsible manner. That also includes perhaps as needed, adding some minor striping or those sorts of things for traffic calming or for pedestrian access where appropriate. But I was doing this. As we can see for the on the next slide, the overview, we do have 55 lane miles of city pavement. If you look at a 20-year, over 20 years expected life, which is the expected time between resurfacing cycles, that's about 2.75 miles per year that we would have to be covering. If we go to 30 years, which is perhaps doable in some instances, that's about 1.83 miles per year. And you see the final line there, our current funding rate, we're around 500,000 per year based on the costs that we have from this year's paving program. That's a half mile that we're able to do per year. And on this table here, what we've got is a 30-year outlook for starting from 2023 to 2052. The first column is the cost per mile that we currently have right now. We're saying it's about $1 million per mile. In 2032, it's going to be 1.4 million. Then it goes to 2.2 million, 42, and 3.2, 3.3, and 52. And with the current funding level in 2023, we'd have about a half mile of paving. And then cumulative from 23 to 32, we'd have about 4 miles. And then 42 would be 7 miles. And then by 2052, we'd have about 8.5 miles of paved roads. And we have 55 miles in our system. The funding levels that we required to meet the target of having the roads paved every 30 years. Again, 2023, that would be 1.8 million. 2032, 2.6 million, 4 million in 2042, and then 6 million in 2052. And again, that does have inflation adjusted for it. So you can see after in the fully funded level at the end of 2052, we'd have all 55 miles. Actually 54.99, so that's 52.8 feet short, so close enough. The next couple of slides will be, again, familiar to you. Again, this is the PCI rating that we have for our streets, kind of outlines how they're graded. Again, PCI values of 0 to 100. 100 is a brand new street, and 0 is it's gravel, basically failed. So for our working with our PCI values and trying to establish a plan going forward, we focus primarily on the streets that are between 40 and 70. And those are the ones that are potential repaves. Anything above that is in really good shape, and anything below that is just failed. And again, this is the payment degradation curve that we'll look at, and that's, if you see there where it says where the red line hits the curve, degradation curve, that's right in the middle of that 40 to 70 range. And that's kind of the peak spot where you're trying to hit as far as doing the rehabilitation. And again, for every street, it's different. One part of town could be totally different than the other. So as far as the paving program, how we identify, there's basically three things that we do to get to the final list. So the first is the assessment. That's primarily the pavement condition assessment. That's when we actually physically look at the streets and do the condition scoring. Again, that's the 0 to 100. What we're going to be doing this year is actually using Road AI, which is a software program that will, based on our determination of what factors are more important as far as what types of failures are in the roadway that are more applicable to us, we can modify that to score it the way that it's appropriate for us. The second step is the ranking. And I believe this is where some of the council members wanted to have some input as far as determining the ranking criteria. PCI scores is always the most important or the heaviest weighted, and then proximity to priority public facilities, proximity to other public projects, water, sewer, utility projects. And then there's other known issues that typically we know internally, and that's drainage issues, structural issues, or other utilities that are causing problems for the pavement and the longevity of that. And then finally is the selection process, where we would map the PCI scores throughout the city, select the streets equitably, making sure that we're not favoring one area or another. Basically a blind view of the things. And then finally, the payments, we select the payment segments, maximizing the funds based on geographical location and the experience of payment management expertise.
Councilor Bodie.
Yes, thank you, Director Perigo. So one of the things so generally at a very high level, I think this ranking and assessment makes sense, though I would add probably traffic volume to the ranking process because I think in general, I would, a road segment that gets more traffic, I would rank higher than one that's a cul-de-sac in the scheme of things. So I'm just reflecting that. But I thought that after this year, we were going to have at least some kind of inventory of all our 55 roads, miles of road. And then this ranking process and selection process would be on top of that. And so is that still planned? Because otherwise it seems there's a somewhat random nature to it. So I thought though that we were going to start with that holistic approach because our inventory that we were basing our current rankings on was very old. And maybe not what our priorities would be today. So I just am asking that question. Do we still plan to do, I don't think it has to be, a very expensive or resource intensive one. I mean, you yourself showed us how you went out and did the assessments with the photos. So I'm not saying you should do it all, but I'm saying it shouldn't be, a huge time consuming and costly process, hopefully. Is that still in the plans? And then this will be an overlay on top of that.
Yeah, again, the first step is to get the pavement condition index, which is probably the hardest thing. Then we do have a GIS team lined up to look at that and then analyze what that looks like, and then also implement whatever other factors we want to put on that, whether it be, again, proximity to public locations or public facilities and those sorts of things. So
we would know for the whole city what the condition of our 55 miles are. And I think GIS is a great way to go on it, but I just wanted to confirm that's what you're saying. Okay, thank you.
Colleagues, other questions for Director Perigo? Councilmember Lee.
Thank you. I wish to express similar sentiments to my council member Bodie, and that is that we had talked about really not a paving program, but a mobility program, of which paving is a component of it, because paving affects pathways as well as biking. And so when we think of an inventory, it's really an asset inventory that considers not only the paving condition, but the bicycle condition as well as pedestrian. And those get included in when we consider what a mobility inventory asset would tell us. And then it's overlaid with things like Councilmember Bodie said, traffic volumes, as well as proximity and pathways to significant facilities. Schools being one of them, parks, center. And so when you consider what you should be paving, it's paving for not just cars, but for pedestrians and bicyclists. That we need to transition from a car-centric view of what we're doing in Lake Forest Park to rather a people-centric view of what we're doing. And that includes all aspects of mobility, not just drive as fast as you can, but things that you do to support other mobilities also help to decrease the speeds that cars are driving through it. When you make streets more narrow, it naturally reduces the drive-through speed. When you put in speed humps or raised crosswalks, those all contribute to enhancing the environment for pedestrians and others that can still be managed through a program that addresses EMT or other fire department, police needs. So I think we're missing the boat here. That we are still thinking of cars and a pavement program. This is not a real infrastructure mobility program that would assess all of the features of our infrastructure, not just how fast can cars move through an area, but think about bicyclists and pedestrians and slowing traffic. We missed the boat. And the other is that, as I've learned, our input to the city is how many dollars do we spend towards a paving program? Because that's through the budget process. We don't have a mechanism as council members to actually approve what our capital program is, other than how much dollars we spend. Because of the interlocal agency agreement that we have with King County, simply says that it's approved through the budget process. So when the administration comes to ask the council, it's for the dollars, it's not for the program. And I would be fully supportive of a resolution that changes the expenditure of our mobility dollars not to just pavement, but that includes approval by review of the council. So we continue to have a car-centric approach. How fast can we go through Lake Forest Park? Not a mobility infrastructure program. And we all know that we cannot afford to build sidewalks, but we need to focus on how do we improve our mobility infrastructure.
Vice Chair Casper.
Thank you. I have to admit, I'm going to express a little frustration here because this council, maybe before you joined it, John, was very interested in creating policy that looked at a holistic mobility plan. And that's what was contained in Prop 1, which was turned down by the people after some very unfortunate messaging, I believe, from various members of the community. And so this is what we're left with after that. We tried because we know that to do what you're talking about is massively expensive. And it doesn't mean, you know, complete streets type sidewalks everywhere. It does mean walking pathway. You know, what we were trying to get to was walking pathways and better bicycle infrastructure. So I don't know. I mean, I'm going to be gone when you guys deal with all this. So I'm just going to have my say now. But we tried on this and we didn't get anywhere. So now we're left with trying to preserve the investment we have just in the infrastructure of the roads, because if we don't do that, it costs 10 times as much to rebuild them as to resurface them at the time they need resurfacing. So we're kind of stuck, right? We don't have the money to do what you're talking about. The community didn't go along with us when we asked them, and so now we're stuck. And what we've got to do is to preserve the investment that we have in those roadways, because if we don't, it's going to cost this community a fortune. So I don't know where you're all going to go with this, but that's my piece for you now to think about.
Thank you, Councilmember Riddle, I think was next.
Thank you. I mean, I don't disagree that multimodality is where we want to get, but I'm of the mind of Councilmember Cassover. We had a plan, Safe Streets program, or the Safe Streets report, Safe Highways report, cross plan for our trails. We have the plans in place. We asked for the funding and we didn't get it. And those that asked the community to look for an alternative, better way have not stepped up with a single solution. So here we are. As the council, it is our responsibility to come up with these solutions. And right now, we don't have the money. Does that mean asking the community again? I don't know. But what I do know is, again, it's not a good fiduciary place to be to let our roads deteriorate and cost the community 5-10 times as much. I do agree that perhaps a paving sort of, I don't know what identification, sort of like a rating is like one part to what we need. So I do agree. It would be great if the roads could be looked at from proximity to parks and schools. And so like maybe there's a 3-part system that gives us an aggregate of what roads might rise up to the next level. So if you have 2 roads that are similar PCI, but this one's by this, it kind of gives you that, whether it has shoulders or sidewalks. So I think we can come up with a system that will take a little while for us to map out across the community. We could even maybe ask the community to help crowdsource that. Hey, tell us where you live and tell us if you have sidewalks or if you have a shoulder, and get the community involved in understanding what we're up against. So I think maybe a 3-part paving, mobility, and then proximity could give us a good pathway forward. In the future, we still have to find funding for it.
Thank you, Councilmember. I would like Councilmember Golden to, did you want to respond, John, or, and we'll go around the horn here if you don't mind.
So I see both sides on this. So first, I'll start with a question. In the packet, you say that the cost is roughly so $500,000 gets us half a mile. So it's about $1 million per mile just for resurfacing. If we had a policy that said where we resurface, we do some sort of mobility, could like extruded curbs, how much would that add to the cost? Are we talking like 1.1 million per mile, 2 million per mile? Do you have a rough feel for that?
It would be relatively nominal, like we did on 35th. We could add extruded curb where you can do it. Again, that's the issue that we run up against, is having that existing pavement width to add pathways.
Okay, so I'm glad that you said that. So the cost is relatively minimal, because that, yeah, I agree. We're not going to get sidewalks, but if we can do anything, extruded curbs is, as a pedestrian, I think it's pretty good. It's, by no means is it the gold standard, but it provides me as a pedestrian with some level of safety. So I would like to see that as a policy. And then looking at other low cost ways. So, I'm not quite sure how we would get cycling infrastructure, but at least if we could get a, if not gold tier, like a bronze tier with extruded curbs, I'd like to see us do that.
Councilmember Furtone, did you want to weigh in before Mr. Hill and then Mr. Lebo?
Appreciate the invitation. Thank you. So I've been trying to think of the question I'm trying to ask, but it's eluding me. So I'm going to ask the half-baked one. I'll ask you then, which is literally, we in the city don't have the capacity, staff-wise, to manage a large number of these kind of infrastructure projects. And so the question is there any other outside source that would not only provide funding for mobility up improvements, but also provide the capacity that we need to actually manage these kinds of projects?
I'm not sure I've got a good answer for you on that one, Tracy.
Okay. Like I said, it was half-baked, so
It's okay. Administrator Hill.
Thanks. And this goes back to the question that Councilmember Goldman asked, and something that Director Perigo was alluding to. Anywhere where we have the pavement width, we're certainly, I think the idea of this criteria is to set it up that all things being equal, and we have all the new PCI ratings across the city. If there's an opportunity to do a street where the existing pavement width exists, that we can put in the extruded curb and make those pathways available, that's certainly something we want to see happen. When we get into trouble is when that pavement width doesn't exist, and now you're getting into, let's go back to Councilmember Riddle's idea from the last council meeting, where we have the right of way, we own the right of way, whether it's 50 or 60 feet, and we have a pavement width much less. That's one hurdle. So we're past acquisition. We don't have to worry about that. But our next step is, what's the condition on the side of the road? There's excavation, you're changing a little bit of the drainage of the road, there's putting down your base. I mean, those costs go up exponentially pretty quickly. The dollars that we're working with today, that $500,000 a year, is, as has been stated, enough to pave over what's already paved. And if the opportunity exists in that existing width, at extruded curb. Now, there could be some instances, and we'd have to look at this from a traffic engineering study, is what size of lane widths are we okay with? Because this goes to Councilmember Lebo's point, is a little bit narrower lanes, you're going to travel slower. And so I think there are opportunities. We don't know what they are, because they're out mapping all this now. And I believe the AI shows us the width of the pavement. So there will be a lot of things answered as far as the facilities we have today as they complete that study.
Mr. Lebo's next. I actually chair's privilege. I'm going to go ahead and weigh in since I haven't weighed in yet. I would also like to say, I don't think these things are mutually exclusive. I understand that we have what we have relative to the funding we have. And so we need to work within our resources for, unequivocally. I do believe that to Mr. Lebo's point, I think that there is some policy that is forward thinking that we need to be anticipating, figuring out a way to find those additional resources to make. Clearly, it's not adequate for what the community is asking for. So we're going to have to figure out ways to kind of, fill in the gaps. And Prop 1 is Prop 1. I really, I wonder, honestly, if we had had some additional policy in place regarding multimodal and pedestrian safety, whether we might have been able to, through that process, help educate the community a little bit better and move things forward. So I'm the perennial middle child here. I see both sides of this, but I really think we need to bifurcate the immediate needs that we have to get the paving program moving forward with changes that make sense from, as Mr. Goldman and many of you have said, about, if there's a possibility of an extruded curb, by all means, let's figure out if we lose, another 100 feet of paving, let's do the extruded curb. Or, I mean, again, don't hold me to that one. It could be even more, but I think the value is definitively there. But I do believe there's a huge value in forward-thinking policymaking relative to multimodal safety, and whether we have the funding for it or not, it can be contingent upon finding the funding. And so that is something that we need to consider. We think about safe routes to school. If we don't have the program, we don't have things engineered to a certain level, we cannot apply for those grants. So we have to continue thinking forward rather than continue to look at our feet. And right now with the paving program, we're kind of continually looking at our feet. So let's look at the horizon. Mr. Lebo, you've been very patient.
Thank you, Deputy.
Nope. There we go.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I have 34 years of design and construction management. There is a better way. When we put forth to voters a paving sidewalk program, we cannot afford it. We all know that just by looking at the numbers, whether it's $1 million for paving or $1 million for sidewalk, we cannot afford it. There is a better way. I met, when I campaigned, a civil engineer who works for the city of Seattle. They look at low-cost alternatives for providing safe passages for mobility. One way they did that was they filled in ditches with gravel to maintain the water flow and then put in an extruded curb. They didn't pave it. They simply filled the ditch in with gravel. I don't know the street number, whether it's 61st, but right on the north end of our Lake Forest Park, there is a very busy street that has no relief. It basically drops off the fog line into a ditch. There are ways, there is a better way that we can provide mobility while protecting our roadway infrastructure that doesn't require us to pave our way to solutions. It just requires some creative thinking and looking at others who have solved this problem before us. This is not an interminable problem. This is something that needs a little creativity to it. And to think that we have to pave every road within 30 years doesn't reflect what actually sees in our environment. The traffic flow that we have on streets is quite variable. SR 522 sees our greatest load. It is a Department of Transportation responsibility, but we have a lot of streets in Lake Forest Park that don't see that kind of flow, that don't see that kind of wear. We can develop creative ways. If we just continue to think about we can only pave our roads and pave or create sidewalks, we are not going to find a solution to this. We are not looking at this creatively.
What's next? And then Councilmember Bo.
Thank you. I think we all understand that it's not sidewalks or nothing. I think we all understand that there's a creative middle ground. I think that we need more time to understand what our options truly are. Gravel infill may be great for someone who's walking, but you can't take a stroller on it, and most of you won't take a road bike on it. So we're still not meeting the needs possibly of what our community needs. Extruded curbs are great, but we can't street sweep behind the curbs. So again, a lot of bicyclists would probably opt to still be on the street because of the debris that would be present on the side of the road. So we're creating these spaces, but they're not functional. And so what I really want to know in the end is, what is our truly most functional option, which isn't a sidewalk? Recently I was up in BC, and there was a bike lane, and it was in with the traffic, but it was up about 3 inches. There was just a little hump, and it, so they could be cleaned with the road, but there was an obvious bump there that a car would be able to know was a barrier to another object. That was a bike lane separate from a sidewalk. It was a downtown core, so it was definitely filled out, with concrete. But I'm seeing these other ideas that are out there, and I think asking these other engineers what creative ideas they're coming up with. But I think we need to figure out if that creative idea is solving enough of our problems for us to be doing a half a job versus committing to doing a job that will actually serve our community much better, but maybe we have to delay it. It's a hard decision to make, but until we have the data on what those 2 options or 3 options are, it's a little hard to be able to direct you which way to go. So I agree completely. There are creative ways. I think the idea of talking to other engineers is a fantastic way to start. But I also want to make sure that we remember the strollers and the bicyclists, as well as your joggers and your walkers. And thank you.
Councilmember Bodie.
Yes, thank you. You know, Director Perigo, I think when I look at this presentation, I say, well, why didn't you mention the full inventory? And why didn't you mention the fact that we've already talked about doing mobility improvements on a shoestring wherever we can? To me, those are policy, doing the mobility improvements wherever we can on our shoestring budget. That is kind of a policy direction from the council already, and that's really important. So to me, I would like any paving program presentation, this is just like food for thought for future presentations, to acknowledge those 2 things as kind of givens. Because we're spending some of our time today trying to, you know, memorialize things that we've said before, basically. So that's in the short term. I would like us to have as policy, as part of the overview or part of the policy framework for our paving program, the fact that we base it on an inventory, then we apply these processes and selection. And I think that we can add some factors like the volume of traffic flow and mobility considerations and pathways. There is proximity to public facilities, but we can add you know, including schools or something like that. So there's a way, I think, to make this on an interim basis, more of what we've been talking about at multiple meetings, but I think it needs to be expressed more clearly, so that we can see it, and so it's validated that the things we've said before are, because you're validating it verbally, but it isn't in the materials, right? So I'm just making a suggestion that we try to, in whatever document we have for our paving program, whether it's slides or not, that we incorporate those concepts and some of the additional ranking criteria or selection criteria that you've heard today. So that's kind of short term. Longer term, what this makes me think is, well, we have our Safe Streets program. And we don't really have a home for that right now. So it's kind of there and we've done it. And it's, I think that the fundamentals of it are still quite good. But what do we want to do? To me, part of the base of getting the community aware or figuring out where we're going to prioritize grant funding or whatever, is taking a look at that. And because I don't think most citizens now, probably they haven't heard about it well, they heard about it in passing from Prop 1, but I think a lot of it went over people's heads. So I think we have a question as council for what do we want to do about safe streets, and is there like a mini Safe Streets report, you know, the cliff notes, so that when we go and talk to people, we're always going over the cliff notes for that, right? So I think about it because I met with the Boy Scouts a couple of weeks ago, and they asked questions about sidewalks and also crossing Ballinger. That was another issue. You know, inability to cross Ballinger because one of them does it every day or something. So anyway, I was trying to think creatively around the whole of what we were talking about. And I kept coming back to our materials aren't saying what we're verbally saying, the written materials, and our Safe Streets report, which is written material, might need kind of a refresh and a cliff notes. So those are my takeaways.
Councilmember Goldman.
Thanks, and I'll echo what some of you have said recently. I think short term, I'd like to see more explicit mention of mobility. But longer term, I think it is a little misguided because kind of the implication of this is we're only going to get pedestrian cyclist improvements if it's tethered to a road fixing program. So I forget which of you had used the word bifurcated, but I think that that's long-term what we should do, that we should, by all means, synergy, if we're going to be repaving this street, let's definitely do mobility improvements. But I think especially if the cost of something like extruded curb or other options is not astronomical, I think we should look at, safe routes to school or safe routes to parks and say, well, okay, yeah, these roads are in fine condition. We're not going to be paving them for another 15 years, but that doesn't mean that they can't have pedestrian improvements in the next 5 years. So I think long-term, I'd like us to split out these mobility improvements away from, or no longer tethering them to road resurfacing.
Thank you, Councilmember. Vice Chair Cassover, and then
Thank
we're
you.
gonna have to move on here in just a second.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to Councilmember Bodie for raising the whole issue of sort of revisiting the State Streets project, because there's a lot of very rich material there, and I think it has been somewhat forgotten, not only by the community, but even as a council. I think it's good to refresh our minds on some of the really good policy ideas that are there, and certainly mobility and bicycle infrastructure and pedestrians. It's all there. It's all in there. So, but to have like a revisiting and then to kind of restate the council's policy position around that is really good on a couple of fronts. One is, just internally as far as our own budgeting, but the other is that I think, it was deeply frustrating to me and then Councilmember Wright when we could not get, and this is before Mr. Perigo was here, Director Perigo, we could not get the city to prepare proposals to go before the Puget Sound Regional Council for the Safe Routes to School money, because we didn't have the basics done. We didn't have the basic policies and analysis in place to allow us to actually prepare those proposals. So to get the city to a place where it can be competitive for those kinds of funding opportunities, I think would be really a good thing. But it takes, that's the sort of thing's probably not going to happen until we get a new project manager in Public Works. And it's going to take some time and to get staff up to speed on it. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but it is definitely, I think, a policy direction worth working towards.
Thank you, Vice Chair Cassover. And we're going to have to move on here.
Leads right to the next one, if you don't mind.
Let me get my thought in, please, first, and then we'll move on after that. Thank you, Councilor Bodie. I think that it's an excellent comment about safe streets. It's also, as a reminder, it's 2017, so it is 6 years old. We need a mini update. I think we, as policymakers, have really kind of three tasks here. One is the immediate need of figuring out what the policy statement is coming from us relative to the expenditure of, and this is part of the budget process. We have an update coming up here, a mid-buy update coming up here relative to the paving overlay plan when it comes to extruded curbs or et cetera. The second one is, where do we approach the broader policy question about the multimodal access, pedestrian safety, a variety of other things. And then the third question is, of course, dovetailing right into that is really a mini update to the safe streets. I think that we need to go back to the community at some point in the very near future, because things have changed in 6 years. We've had a pandemic, we've had the explosion of e-bikes, and other methods of and scooters and other things as well. And we need to consider all the modes of transportation as well. Councilor Riddle.
And just another piece that I haven't heard yet, and I apologize if it was mentioned earlier, but making sure that roads are designed speed appropriate. So there may be times where we have more pavement than we need, that creating that kind of congested feel will make folks go the speed that's the actual posted speed limit. And that would make the roads safer for people who are walking on them.
Thank you. Okay, so Yes.
You know, I understand all that. I really think, Larry, you're on the right track. You need to get a way to have a separate pot, right? Yeah, really, I know everybody that wants cars and stuff. Right now, pavement is still really important because I guarantee you that we had 5 Amazon vans drive by your house in the last 24 hours. And the garbage trucks come by still every week. So the asphalt does serve a purpose. Including the fire trucks. And that's one of the things you gotta think about when you start narrowing things and stuff. The fire department has real theory on that. Yeah, like we think you need another pot of money set aside somehow. You all know the non-regions, the color of money, people just for that mobility stuff. So when we are taking care of our pavement, you guys said, okay, this is great, this is something we can do. And you got a little pot of money to put on that says different way, one thing that we actually do is stop. We need it all.
Okay, we're going to run out of time here, folks. We got to move on to multimodal healthy streets pilot proposal. This is from Councilmember Goldman, and in Mr. Goldman's self-deprecating way, he put my name on this, and I'm not going to take credit for this other than helping encourage this process. Mr. Goldman.
Sure. And I think, Matt, do you have the slides? And then Director Perigo, could you pass me the slide changer? Thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
All right, so this is meant to be relatively short, and since you mentioned we're low on time, I'll try to speak as quickly as possible while still being intelligible. But it's something that the three of us, I think you're selling yourself short, that we did have quite a few meetings to kind of discuss this. So, see which button is it? Where should I be aiming? Oh, was that me or is that you? Excellent. I do this for a living. You might not think that. Right. So our goals are that we want to make it safer for people to get around without cars, whether it's by walking, by cycling, e-bikes. What can we do? And something that we've heard from residents is that as traffic is getting worse, there's more cut through traffic, and that makes these neighborhood streets less safe. So can we address both of those? Can we reduce cut through traffic in certain areas to make it easier for people to kind of reclaim their neighborhood streets? And we've taken some inspiration from what Seattle's done. During the pandemic, they had their Healthy Street program, where they basically said, okay, here's a whole bunch of streets around the city. These are going to be local access only. And so, other than the people living there, emergency vehicles, delivery, other than that, it drastically cuts down on the amount of traffic. And my understanding is they don't do a whole lot of enforcement, and just purely putting those signs up is enough to get most people to avoid those streets. So what the three of us set out to do is to say, can we do something like that in Lake Forest Park? And we're thinking, we would like to do a pilot where we choose maybe 3 or so streets around the city, and we make them local access, and we see how that goes. So that's kind of our motivation for this process. So what did we consider, just for the purposes of the pilot, is that, or actually in general, we want to make sure there's community support. So for the roads that we chose for the pilot, people kind of informally asked around the neighborhood, got people's takes, and it was pretty positive. That's something we would want to do more generally. We want to know where, at least anecdotally, people are concerned about cut through traffic, where it's not feasible to do other things like put a speed camera in, because that's, we can't do that across the entire city. Certain streets, we could do some sort of physical engineering to make them more pedestrian friendly, but that's not going to be a global solution. And I think it's also important for this to be throughout the city, so that we're not just saying, okay, this neighborhood is going to be pedestrian friendly. We want to try to make this something that could apply to all the neighborhoods in the city. And also making it clear that we're not banning cars, and we're not making this a foot traffic only street. People who live there will still be able to access it, mail trucks, emergency vehicles. Cars can still go on it. We're not looking to pedestrianize it completely, just to reduce the amount of car traffic. So that's kind of the general big picture idea. And I don't have it here, but we sort of have a very rough draft of what this program might look like and a possible or an early draft of an ordinance that the council might approve if we wanted to move forward. In terms of the pilots, again, we reach, actually, I didn't do a whole lot of reaching out, but others, Tom and Semra, or sorry, Deputy Mayor French. Is this the one where we use first names or? Those two, that's probably the rudest way I could say that, kind of reached out and it was pretty uniformly positive feedback about people who were concerned about cut through traffic. And we also looked at the map and we said, well, you know, just looking at like, okay, if our major streets are, say, Ballinger Way, Bothell Way, we're looking at, you know, what's parallel to those streets. What do we think would be the most prone to be cut through traffic? And we also wanted to be mindful that, you know, for instance, Perkins Way is not a good pilot street. It's too big. So we want to start with relatively small streets just as a proof of principle that this can work here. So here are a couple of maps. The three that we came up with. On the left map, we have the first is Hamlin between 37th and 169th. So that's the green. Possibly we wanted to extend it to Brookside. That as sort of a cut through for people who want to avoid Brookside. Also in that same general area is 44th. Again, sort of another, it's sort of for, you know, I was a math major, so I shouldn't probably use the word parallel, but it's parallel-esque to Bothell Way. It's a shortcut people could take to avoid Bothell and Ballinger to get up to 178th. It's all, and as again, so trying to focus on keeping people on major streets. And then in another area of the city, there's 37th, which is parallel to, it's near Acacia. So 37th, where it's parallel to Bothell, just east of Bothell Way. That's another one that residents have complained people are looking to bypass Bothell Way traffic. So that was kind of what we considered if we were to do a pilot. Let's try these three. It seems to kind of hit, you know, it's a couple of neighborhoods in the city. It's parallel to bigger roads where we would like to keep cars. That way it frees up the smaller roads to be more pedestrian friendly. So that's kind of where we are in terms of what a pilot might look like. I'll just mention some other candidates that we didn't consider. One of those was, so on the left map, we're thinking about near Grace Cole Park. That's another area where anecdotally we've gotten complaints from residents, but it doesn't really kind of hit cut through in a sense. Perkins is just kind of a bit too large. The area near Horizon View Park, again, that's kind of actually the major route. Plus, we're thinking that that's a park district, so we could get some speed cameras there. So for those reasons, those roads wouldn't really be all that feasible as a pilot for this, because there's other strategies we could choose. You know, since we've amended our city code to allow for cameras in park districts, that would sort of address Grace Cole, Horizon View. So I just wanted to point out some of the streets that we considered, but said, you know, that might not be right for this project. Or Perkins, you know, there's talk, you know, could we do like a one-way couplet between Perkins and 178th? That's a much bigger project. So in terms of pilot, you know, this is kind of what we were looking at, these three. So that's where we're at in terms of, you know, what streets we like. Also important for us to know whether this works. So we were thinking that we would want both qualitative and quantitative data. Qualitative, let's hear from the residents. Do people feel more comfortable? The people who live along these streets, do they feel more comfortable? Do they, you know, is it easier for them to go out with their kids, their pets, and play around on the street? Quantitative, could we get data on traffic volume? Are people actually obeying the signs? Are people sticking to the more major roads? And then, you know, I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but do we want to try this out for 6 months? I mean, it's probably worth having a pilot that kind of hits the dreary winter rainy season, but also the summer season to get a feel, you know, make sure that people are consistently enjoying this. And then moving forward, yeah, I don't think this should be totally, I don't think any of us think this should be top down. We kind of came up with the pilot streets, but I'd like it if neighborhoods could propose. And I think we talked about that when we were talking about parking permits. I think that was something Councilmember Bodie brought up. Let the people of each of a neighborhood say, hey, there's an issue, there's just too many people parking here, like park and hide, I think was your term. Same thing with cut through traffic. Let the people on the who know their local neighborhoods come to us and say, hey, we're seeing a lot of traffic during rush hour when Ballinger is clogged up. Maybe, you know, bring that to us and or to staff, and that could be, you know, the next generation of these sort of healthy streets. So that is kind of what we came up with, and happy to answer questions or pass it off to Council Members French and Riddle.
Councilmember Riddle first, and then Councilmember Bodie. Question.
Sure. I actually don't really have anything to add. Larry put together a fantastic presentation. It covered all of our points. Yeah, so just open for any questions, or if Tom has a thought.
You know, just one quick thought, mentioning Perkins, which seems to come up more and more. Since we started having these conversations a number of months ago, I've had 5 different families mention in passing, pun intended, that Perkins, they live on Perkins and they're challenged by what's going on there, like to see some sort of program. But completely agree with my colleagues that that's a big engineering question about that, and et cetera. Councilmember Bodie.
Yes, thank you. I had, well, first of all, on Perkins, I'll just say, recall that the Parks and Recreation Board is trying to have that one day where we'll close Perkins up to like 182nd and have kind of a city recreational day. And so hopefully Corey is going to be following up and working on that. I think the Parks Board has kind of come up with the concept, and we do. This is the challenge for poor Corey, who has a lot of jobs, to kind of help us. We're looking at the fall, or when the weather's not too bad in the fall, early fall. I just was curious about the choice of the streets, because they do seem to be kind of close together. And do we want to ask, had you thought about asking the community even now to identify pilot projects? I vaguely recall there are some streets up where, you know, Lake Forest Park and Kenmore and Briar maybe all come together, where there's also cut through traffic occurring up there, kind of not cut through traffic that comes from Ballinger or Bothell Way, but comes through Kenmore. And I can't recall exactly where that is, but I think we've had citizen comment or emails about that at some point. But I just was wondering if you had thought about reaching out even for the pilot project to see if people wanted to volunteer their you know, neighborhood, their streets for that. So just a question on that.
We kind of did, but I think it would be hard to evaluate their request. So I think that's where the pilot program came in, because we're going to learn a lot from that. And if we try to bite off too much, then the program could be a failure, simply because we're not set up for it. So I think we were just trying to hit the highlight of the most kind of obvious ones right now that we know, but 6 to 12 months, maybe in 6 months, we know it's a success and we can open up to communities.
So I assume if a particular neighborhood didn't want to be the pilot, we would hear. So one of the outreach things we need to find out is, do they want to be in the pilot? Because I don't think it should be a tell from the city. So I know you all know that. So I'm just repeating the obvious.
We do need, before you do anything to a city, you do need or from a street, you do need the kind of approval of everyone on the street. We did not want to go through and take that effort yet without the council approving the pilot. So yes.
Vice Chair Castleberry.
Thank you very much, Tom. I was wondering if you looked at Forest Park Drive, because it's a cut through street for Ballinger Way. People use it to get to 15th, and it would fit all the sort of criteria that you put forth for the other ones, and it adds a different area of the city.
I can address that. I think we mentioned that at the beginning. One of the challenges there is sort of similar to Perkins, because it is pretty involved engineering to try to close off parts of that. You're going to have to do, it should be a walking area, honestly. It doesn't need to be. It's just there's a serious amount of, you have sites, you have what, two side streets coming in, I believe, to Forest Park Drive, correct?
You have two off of, you
Yeah.
have 196th and you have 195th.
Yeah, but I think that is an excellent one too. And again, Summer's point about we wanted to talk about the pilot. Again, this is just really very the nod, move forward. There's a lot of work to be done here. And the question that you had, just addressing this real quickly, and I think Summer was about ready to go there. 197th and some of those other streets, people are driving up and over from Mount Lake Terrace and dropping down into Briar and Kenmore. And it's a very, very challenging situation. And it exacerbates the issue with the lack of infrastructure. I believe it's on not 61st, but the road that runs along there with the big ditch. I run there all the time.
Could I just add, you don't have to do the whole road either. So I'm familiar with the blocks that are by Greenwood, and it's only for a few blocks. It doesn't go on forever. So you can think of doing parts of some of these roads.
My favorite pilot that Seattle did is 74th and First, right off of Greenwood. Those blocks right there are excellent. Mr. Lebo, you wait.
Thank you. I am supportive of this. I do think we should consider equity across Lake Forest Park. I would offer, though, that these have been piloted many times, and that we should not always think of it has to be invented here. We should just adopt it. If people want to do it, I mean, look at all the other communities that have done it. It's already been piloted. We don't need to reinvent what has already been proven to be an acceptable thing. If we do that, we won't be creative to find solutions that will benefit our citizens. How long did Seattle take before they adopted the healthy streets and just said during the pandemic, if you want to close your street, just do it? And not because I have any interest in Nike, but just do it. Come on. Our citizens expect us to produce rather than talk. And if you are going to do a pilot, do it for a season, which all 4 seasons, which is a year, but I don't think it needs to be done. Just do it.
Completely agree. Mr. Fertani.
Yeah, and I wanted to echo John's comments. I think that's exactly what I was, thanks for making the comment. We should just adopt this. One thing I wanted to ask y'all was, does Seattle actually have similar kind of evaluation criteria as what you were seeking? Would they have a report available on how Healthy Streets is working for them?
They have a fair amount of information up that I read about when we first started putting this package together, but then we got distracted by some of our other more pressing legislation. I cannot remember exactly, but I believe they did at one point have similar kinds of criteria, but they may have moved beyond that now to just whatever.
Yeah, my recollection is, Tracy, is that during the pandemic, it was sort of come on, come all. And then they had a bucket of money that they said, okay, we're kind of sunsetting this, but you can apply for this bucket of money. That's my understanding in terms of the actual, and I believe I think it's on a petition basis that they can choose to do it. The neighborhoods can get together and ask for it. But I haven't looked in a number of months. We started this conversation June of last year, I believe. So things have changed a bit.
And on point, I mean, the reason I'm asking is because that would be the new piece that we would have. Is basically, does it really have any effect? But if, as you say, somebody has actually done this before and done these kinds of reports, then it might be the case where we just do this thing and, we know that it's going to work. So why not? One other point I wanted to make is on 37th, that has actually a designation as a truck route. Is that going to make any difference to this?
I mean, I don't have an answer to that specific question. I would imagine, yeah, it's the sort of thing we'll have to look at. I kind of want to address what some of you were saying about piloting. And I totally see your point that, yeah, Seattle has done this, and actually looking on their Healthy Streets website, they've collected this sort of both like quantitative data about volumes and also surveys of the public. So yeah, they've shown this, you know, that they've shown that it's useful. I suppose maybe pilot is not exactly the best word. I would see it as, you know, if we just said, we want the community to start proposing neighborhoods, that could take a while to get up and running. And so, hey, we've kind of started the process. We've chosen 3 streets or so that we want to start with. And as those are spooling up, we can start reaching out to the community. So not so much a pilot as in proving the concept, but more, yeah, let's hit the ground and say, well, we know this can work. Here are 3 streets we would like to start with immediately while we get feedback from the community about others.
Councilmember Bodie.
In the parking permit provision, I had some range of household support that I had. It was somewhere in the 60 to 70% range. I had looked at a number of different parking programs. I would not want to decide on these streets as council members without making sure that 60 to 70% of the people on those streets support this proposal. So I don't think we can just launch without that that effort. So that I'm just quite cautious about people, you know, are very possessive of their neighborhoods, and we don't know honestly what the reaction would be to the neighbors on these streets. I would hope it would be overwhelmingly positive, but we don't know. So just a caution there.
Councilmember Riddle and then Vice Chair.
I think the one reason why we're thinking of this as a pilot is it allows administration to get up to speed, and how do they handle requests, and how do they, you know, bring the barriers out, and what signage do we have on the barrier? And there's some, yes, the program's been done before, but we need to have the systems in place internally. One of which is, how do we get approval from these areas where we've heard from many of the residents, but not all of them? So what is that process? And I think that's why I like this as like just a pilot program. Is I think it's less about testing it with the community and more about allowing the administration to build in what it needs to.
I would not support it if we don't have a sign up from the citizens.
Well,
So I just want to, I'm sorry, I spoke out of turn.
I want to be very clear. We're not saying these roads are going to be, we're suggesting them as the first opportunities because we've heard some already. They would need to be confirmed. So if you, the pilot program doesn't have to have the street names in it, but the idea is the pilot program is where we've heard some interest and suspect that it's probably a lot of interest. But yeah, we do need to give the administration time to actually vet the street, build the program internally, set up what the signage is that's on the barriers that are there. And I think if we open it as just a full program, there's a chance that possibly they'd be overwhelmed. They have to tell people no. And I think we just want to start where we can actually build the base of this. And I agree. We will not be directing residents to be forced into this position, but we just picked those because we've heard some mumblings that this would be something they'd accept.
I'd like to let Mr. Hill speak, then Councilmember Vice Chair Casper, and then Councilmember Lebo.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. I think to Councilmember Bodie's point, I think we would definitely want a petition from the neighborhood. You pick the percentage that you're comfortable with, you know, is it 60, is it 70%? I've had streets where we thought we heard a lot. And then when that petition went around, they just couldn't get it through. And so I think you definitely want that buy-in. And then, you know, we would need to have the discussion. What does this look like? Is it like the goat trail with those road closed signs, local traffic only idea? I think there's some details we'd want to work through, because if this becomes permanent, that's not an attractive road closure that we have up there. And you know, maybe we should look at something more permanent. The other point, and now I'm gonna lose my train of thought. Shoot. Wow, and I was doing so well there.
It's
for a
okay. We
minute.
can come back to you if you think.
Come
of
back
it.
to me, I'll raise my
You
hand.
bet,
but-
Mr. Hill. Vice Chair Cass.
So I do think that as Councilmember Bodie pointed out and Councilmember Cassover, that I think it's important to have buy-in from the folks on the street, and that we're not just simply saying it's going to become a local access only. The other is, I sort of view Seattle's approach as they are continuing always to evaluate what is the best solution for their neighborhoods. And I don't see that as an impediment to wait for them to determine whether a particular street should be a local access only, but rather to recognize that it's not a static issue, but it responds to, and then the city, I think, is very forward thinking to suggest that it continues to look at, is this the appropriate solution? So I wouldn't be hesitant to moving forward, except to the point, as my distinguished council members have pointed out, that there certainly needs to be buy-in from the neighborhoods to do this. And so to suggest streets at this point, I think is premature.
Yes, I just wanted to share some of the insights from the looking at the parking permit process, because I did spend a good amount of time researching that. And there are some parallels, as Councilmember Goldman talked about. First of all, it takes city staff time and kind of signage and so forth. And the parking permit program we were talking about required a petition of a certain percentage of people. And it was somewhat tailored, unlike a Healthy Streets proposal where it's local access only, most likely all the time, right? The parking permit could have been adopted any particular way for any particular time of day. So you could have regular parking most of the time, but you know, it was geared towards whatever the situation was that the neighborhood was experiencing. So but the third element was you have to pay, because the city, it has to pay for itself. The city is not doing this without getting paid for it. And so I would say that if you want a healthy street proposal, I don't think the administrative costs are going to be, you know, as much as like requiring cars to get permits, right? That's a little bit more. You have to, there's some complexity to that, or requiring a household to get a parking permit, and maybe it switches from car to car, but as long as it's their parking permit. So that's a more complicated system. It probably has to be renewed, but this should not be any cost to the city. The program should pay for itself. And so it kind of goes with the petitioning. If citizens support it, they should also pay the somewhat modest administrative cost to have the signs, to maintain them, to do whatever policing if there are complaints that come up. I assume they wouldn't be policing it on a regular basis, but if complaints came up, the city would be required to deal with it. So I also support this if it doesn't cost the city. So I'm not against it. I'm trying to get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts that I say. I'm very much for it. I love the Greenwood Healthy Street project. So I'm a fan. I just think with all we have on our plate and our budget considerations, and the fact that some of this could involve public works and the police department where we're stretched thin, we need to think about it paying for itself.
Thank you, Councilmember. We're going to run out of time here. Just a couple of thoughts I just want to weigh in. Something you said, I'm glad you read that because there is a difference in Seattle. There's the Neighborhood Greenways program and the Healthy Streets program. And I completely forgot. That's something we need to make sure that we take a look at too, because the Neighborhood Greenways program is really an important one that goes way back before the pandemic. And they converted some of those to this sort of walking routes with chicanes and things like that. And the question to pilot, I think that's probably, you know, these streets are, this is more of a, hey, this is an idea. And then the next step is if the council says, yes, we'd like to move forward with this, then there would be consideration by, you know, how to do the outreach and say, neighbors, do you think this is an appropriate thing, or, you know, petitions, et cetera. And to Mr. Hill's point, of course, and Councilmember Bodie's, making sure that the people are interested in it. And there may be other neighborhoods that have a more pressing need that would like to see it. The question of funding, from my standpoint, that's a perennial challenge. I mean, I think it's not that expensive for us to do, but at the same time, signs, and if you look at like the 74th and First and Greenwood, that area, some pretty nice concrete barrier sign issues and planters too that they put in places there, even though they're temporary. Mr. Goldman.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. We do want community buy-in. I suppose, you know, if I could clarify my thoughts, it was that in the interest of, you know, letting staff spool this up, long term, it would be purely neighborhoods deciding amongst themselves to start a petition. For these first couple, it might be us saying, hey, we think this would be a good idea. Here's a petition. How about, we encourage those pilot streets to start their petition.
There you go.
And so it would still require a completed petition. It's just we're sort of starting the petition for them, as opposed to it being purely 100% grassroots. So in both cases, we would still be requiring community buy-in.
And to Councilmember, by the way, just thank you, Larry. I completely agree. And to Councilmember Lebo's point, let's not reinvent the wheel here. There's plenty. The policy side of it is our job. Let's shamelessly look at what Seattle has and see if we can just imitate some of their language, et cetera, to move forward with how that works. Keeping in mind that Seattle has very deep pockets when it comes to many of these programs, despite what they say, and particularly on the legal front. So we want to make sure that we dot our I's and cross our T's.
And just for reference, the model ordinance that we were working off of was cribbed from Seattle. So that's already sort of where this was built from.
Thank you, everybody. I just want to do a quick time check. I can probably get through a couple of these things. The last item we had on our agenda was continued discussion of speed limit reductions. Since we're going into recess, I did want to put this out there because there's going to be some work that needs to be done on this. The first one is the consideration of a no racing zone ordinance. I brought this, ran this around with staff and the PD and the prosecutor a number of months ago. And initially there didn't seem to be a need, the feedback that we got, but with the caveat from the chief that if they had a component in the law at the state level that was modeled after, I believe it was Kent's seizure law, which is that after a number of incidents of somebody's been prosecuted and convicted of racing within a certain area, that the vehicles actually seized, that would have some teeth. That goes into effective January 1st. The state passed it. It's Senate Bill 5606. And so communities are now putting some of these no race zone ordinances into effect. When I spoke with the chief at after our last council meeting, he was aware of that was going into effect, and it does make some sense for us to consider a no race zone ordinance. Shoreline has one, which has been very effective, and now it'll be even more effective because one of the challenges is people with very, very expensive cars, they just pay the tickets, do whatever happens. They get their car, there's just not enough teeth in the laws for people driving some very, very expensive cars. And so that's one one question. And I have a draft of that ordinance model after shorelines that I would like to bring back to council for consideration. Commensurately, we did not, under the new state statute that went into effect this year on cameras, we did not add the race zone option to the Lake Forest Park Municipal Code camera section, auto enforcement camera, speed camera enforcement section. If we choose to do a race ordinance, we would also have to do a commensurate update to that actual fourth section of that. The other question is any discussion, as Mr. Goldman mentioned earlier, about park zone camera placement, things like that. We're not there yet, but any discussion of that, I have been very clear that my position on those revenues for new installations need to go into a fund dedicated to capital multimodal safety improvements. And I would like to bring that to budget and finance for consideration to develop a policy to recommend to the council. And I'm saying that for new installations. And keep in mind with this, some of these installations, depending on what they are, half the revenue, half the net revenue has to be shared with the state for their safety, transportation safety fund, which in true legislature form has not been, there's no policy about how that money can be spent. So we will not go there as policymakers. We'll make sure that there's a way to do that. But I wanted to mention that. And the last question is something that I think is going to take some time. And it's been in the news recently, the question of any placement of some of these cameras, some of the camera locations requires an equity study, which takes a period of time. Some communities like Bellevue have a broader equity program that is that some of this falls under that umbrella. So they're taking pieces of that off of there to, I believe Seattle has it as well as part of some of their traffic safety camera programs, because they have very large programs in terms of equity, and wish we had that opportunity. But the question of an equity study down the line, it's something I might bring to council here in the fall, because it's going to take some time, and I want to make sure that we have our I's dotted and our T's crossed going forward. Any thoughts on that in terms of those 4 items? Race ordinance, and commensurately updating the Lake Forest Park Code, equity study, and additional camera revenue. Yes.
Yeah, a couple of questions. Do you have to, on the racing ordinance, do you have to specify the streets, or is it just citywide?
No, you do. You have to specify the streets.
And do we have information about where this might already be happening in Lake Forest Park?
We certainly do. Yeah, we certainly do from the
are
citations and anecdotally. And keep in mind that racing is not considered under the state statute. It's not considered an organized event. It can be a single person exhibiting speed for the purpose of showmanship, et cetera.
Right.
And in our community, honestly, it would be something like we've heard complaints about 178th, 522. You can hear it even tonight. You can hear people going by excessive speeds, but that's different than. The other one is 197th. It's a place where they've had real problems. That's why they put the radar camera up there. Just your speed is going up towards Horizon View. And 28th, which is one, while it's not a cut through the street, it is one that's perennial. Then it's always been that way since time immemorial. People raced on that street.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. I'm very much in favor of that. I in my neighborhood, they're up 182nd. There's
182nd.
Yep. Yes.
Just for a data point, Shoreline has all of Aurora is considered no race zone. It's either almost all of 15th. Or all of 15th is considered also a race zone as well. Particularly if you see the signs in North City up there by the former post office. And then there's a couple other where they've just designated literally the entire length of the street, because they've had their problem is very severe and it's large organized events, which is a challenge. But this is just part of this is to give us an additional force multiplier, as the chief says, to discourage someone tearing through the community. And as we've heard, 197th, 197th, 182nd, there is an individual,
Excuse me, I meant to say 184.
184th. Yes, thank you. There's an individual that recidivism is just staggering for this person, and this will give a tool for the PD to make something change.
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to let you know, I'm totally in support of that. And I'm particularly in support of the your camera revenue idea that it should go to pedestrian safety, plan. So that to me is absolutely the right way to go. Appreciate you taking, bringing those forward. And and I've just lost, what was the third thing you were going to bring forward?
So there's the race ordinance, which also has the updated in the Lake Forest Park Municipal Code for cameras.
Oh, right,
So
right.
there's basically three.
Okay,
In fact,
yeah.
equities and the
So
budget.
it's all of a piece. So thank you very much for doing that, Tom.
Councilmember-
I think we've mentioned this before. I'm fully behind additional traffic camera revenue being put into a pot where we have policies and how it is being used for multimodal and safety. And I would love to see us get to a point in our budget where we could start converting existing cameras. We're not there yet, but I think we would love to see that camera revenue go down as people are behaving, and what little money we get, what goes into safety, but we're not there yet. But I think that's a lovely goal for us to have. I think the racing ordinances, I think that'd be useful to have as a useful tool for the police department to have. It shouldn't be affecting very many people, but those that do are very dangerous. And then I think the equity study, I think that's a little bit more challenging as far as budgeting it in and what kind of time it takes. But I think we should get there, because I think we do need these extra cameras around our community to ensure safety.
Sorry, Councilmember Bodie didn't have.
I'm not gonna go on at length. I agree with what my colleagues have said. I would say the equity study is more complicated for us because we have people passing through our city. We're like a transit route, and that is. It's something I've talked to the chief about. It's a complex issue because it's not like equity of involving our residents. It's a lot of passage with our two highways and then the cut through traffic that's related to those highways. So that's kind of a complicated area, and I'm not quite sure where that would go. But I think these make sense, and I especially support dedicating revenues if we have new traffic cameras to mobility and safety.
Thank you, Councilmember Bodie. Other Councilmember Lebo.
Thank you for bringing these forward, and conceptually, I'm supportive of this. And I like the idea of dedicating camera revenue to public safety with regard to pedestrians. However, I don't think that we should limit ourselves or hamstring ourselves. We always will face sort of structural issues with regard to our revenue. And I would be disinclined to put it into a dedicated revenue fund because I think in the long term that will be problematic for us as a city. And so I would encourage expenditure for public safety, but not necessarily have it dedicated.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. Councilmember Furtani.
Like my colleagues, I'm in favor of all the proposals, though I do share some of the similar concerns about the revenue just because of our structural deficit. The equity study, I agree with Councilmember Bodie that it is problematic because of the number of people who don't live here that use our roads. And I'm not even sure what that would even look like or tell us. And so I'd have to know much more detail about that in particular.
Thank you. It's required by state statute. So I think part of it is, I think that even exploring what that looks like is going to take some time too as well. Councilmember Goldman, did you have any thoughts?
I think one of you has to turn yours off. Yeah, I'm on board. I suppose in terms of the funding, I do like the idea of saying that, traffic cameras that are put in places for pedestrian mobility should stay in that field. I wouldn't want us, I worry that if it goes into the general fund, it could be repurposed for anything. And I do think we should be able to tell the public that, hey, because some members of the public are cynical and say, well, you're just doing this because you want a cash grab. And I think if we say it's designated for pedestrian improvements, then we can go to the public and say, this is not about balancing our books. This is, we want to make it safer for people. And here are A, B, and C projects that we have done thanks to this revenue. So I do like the idea of designating it for mobility.
Thank you, Councilmember. And just a reminder, I mean, you probably heard me say this ad nauseum, as Councilmember Riddle was going towards we'd all like to see the revenues to be zero. Honestly, I mean, that means people are behaving themselves, and it is of course a challenge. And I hear Councilmember Lebo very, very clearly too about not hamstring ourselves, so to speak. My words, not yours, John, but about the specifics on the fund of the use of the funds. I think there's a way we can bifurcate that so that it would not. You can have I'm using that word twice tonight. Sorry, I'll find another word tomorrow. But at the risk of repeating myself, I think there's a way that we can make sure that the policy is so that the monies stay in a place that are identified. The council can help guide the policy for the use of those funds without exactly what Councilmember Golden was saying relative to the public saying it's a revenue grab. We can find a way to give it a little bit more flexibility potentially. So with that, let's see, making sure I'm not missing anything. I really appreciate your time, everyone, tonight, and thank you for a very good discussion. And thank you very much to Councilmember Goldman and Riddle for the presentation, and Councilmember Bodie.
Yes, sorry to stop us from adjourning even for a few seconds. We did touch on the parking permit process and that rough draft ordinance with a lot of questions in it that we circulated, and I think we all were quite interested in it. There were some really good comments that came forward and questions on how it would work, not all of which could be answered at the time, but I want folks to know that as the public process goes forward for the park, the lakefront park, I think we will want to have that process that we can point to. And in 2024, if Sound Transit starts construction, we are going to want to have that process in place as something that we can point to that down the road citizens can avail themselves of. So it doesn't have to be urgently, but in early 2024, I can't believe it's going to be 2024. In early 2024, I would like to make sure that we actually move that into our code. So if we could just think about the stages and the work, it does require our city staff to think about it too, because what kind of work and infrastructure would we need internally on that? Again, it may never even be used because there is no pilot project. But I think it would be important for us to have available to the community, and it's a very good way for us to address some of those issues that could be coming up in connection with the lakefront park. So just it's more a note for future agendas.
Yeah, just 1 second. Just on point. That is actually in the parking lot, Councilmember Bodie. We're talking about trying to figure out a way to make part of that happen this fall.
I thought it was a new town.
No, it's not a new town. Miss Pratt.
I was just gonna say Administrator Hill has given that to me, maybe for the second time. I apologize.
Yeah, so it is.
And
It's
as
not in the
to
impound
review
lot.
it, so it is on my list to move it up. So exactly.
Thank you, Kim. And before I got off on a tangent there, I did want to thank Director Perigo and Ms. Pratt and Administrator Hill too for your presentations tonight. And thank you very much, Jeff, for your presentation. I know we'll be. It's a fun topic, apparently, this policy board. So we'll continue to discuss it. So thank you all. And with that, unless there's anything else for the good of the order, we're adjourned.